Historical Depot Society for the video history of Columbia County. Today, February 8, 1991, Dick Juris is interviewing Hallie Fletcher. The video camera is being operated by Mike Floyd.
Can you just tell me a little bit about, I don't know you at all, and you don't know me really, and tell me a little bit about what you know about, when did your family come to Dayton, and how'd you arrive here anyhow?
Well, I guess I arrived the usual way. I was born at the old Reining Hospital on December the 29th, 1916. My mother died about 6 weeks later. She had tuberculosis, and my father's folks raised me, my granddad and grandmother Fletcher. And we lived in Dayton some, and then moved out to Payne Hollow to the ranch, and we used to ride our horses to school, and I can remember the old muddy roads before they ever got any gravel out there.
What was Dayton like when your first recollection and stuff?
Dayton really lived on Saturday night. I mean, everybody come to town on Saturday night, and I remind you, those sidewalks were 4 feet wider on each side than they are now, and the sidewalks were so full of people that even when I was a little kid would have quite a time dodging in and out trying to get up and down the street. And stores stayed open way late. Everybody lived on Saturday night.
Tell us more about your family. What about how many children? How many? You remember your grandparents at all? And
Yes,
stuff
they
like
raised
that. Talk about that.
Well, my granddad Fletcher came to this country as a small boy about 1872, I think. And then his father homesteaded up at South Touchy. He wanted to get up close to where he could have water power and wood. He made wooden bowls, and he had to have water power to run his lathe. And the Mannings, my grandmother Fletcher's parents, they came here around close to 1872 or somewhere in that order. I remember the saying when they came through, all that land down around the Walla Walla Airport was open for homestead, but they came right through there and come and get up to the mountains where they could have wood and water, which was pretty important in cold weather. And
They only have a piece of the action now, huh?
Yeah. They used to have my granddad had quite a threshing outfit in the early days there with the old stationery, and steam engine, separator, and self feeder. There was, I think sometimes they had as many as 30 men working around there, but usually probably 18 or something.
How many kids in the family?
Fletcher family, well, my dad's family they raised seven boys and 8 girls, or 1 girl, 7 boys and 1 girl, and 8 that lived. There was 2 girls and a boy that died in infancy. My mother's folks, the Hatfields, they raised my older brother, and they lived over in southern Idaho. You want to talk about this threshing a while? Or?
Yeah, tell us about the business and.
Well, on the school there, I went to the old Columbia school. We always grandmother would make our lunch in one of these mother oat boxes. And cut the top down about 1/3 and then fold it over and then put it in a flour sack and tie it. Not in a flour sack, and we tie that on a saddle. We always went on a dead run to school, and certainly coming from school, the horses wanted to go get home as quick as they could. I don't want you taking awful beating, but we always got there. And I went most all the 8th grade, except the 6th grade. I went into Dayton. That was, I think it was in 1927. And Virgie, that was my dad's older brother's daughter, Virgie Kitterman. Charlie was her father. She drove the old Model T Ford, and we came to school, and that was the year that they made the first Pioneer Bridge at the end of Main Street, and they had the footing poured, and then this terrible flood came and washed the footings all out and everything, and had to redo the whole thing. And then since then they've taken that bridge out and built the one that's there at present. I think one of the I went my freshman year in Dayton, and then on the 19th of May 1931 I saddled my horse up in Payne Hollow and I rode through to Starbuck, and that's been my home address ever since. I had to finish the other 3 years of high school at the Starbuck High School. It was quite a letdown after going to a good school. I used to spend the summers up at Humpeg Falls. That was a nice place to be. It was the end of the road was right at our cabin, and if we wanted to go on up, we go on horseback or foot. It was really there was old virgin forest in there, very beautiful.
Is it still there?
Pardon?
It's still there?
Well, it's there, but it's not like it used to be. And, I don't know, we went to, in the Starbuck, we were batching. Dad said it just happened that the cook left the day before I got there, and I was 14 years old. And Del Thompson and Dad were trying to level up some land, seed alfalfa. I was 14, but my first job he gave me was to go out and kill 3 roosters. He'd buy 100 of these Leghorn roosters every year, and then that was you'd eat them during the summer, and that was your fresh meat supply. And I had to kill and dress, clean, and cook 3 of those roosters. I was 14 years old. And also made butter and everything, and there seemed to always be a bunch of bums around there. Dad had sheep, and there was old sheep herders that worked there, or these hobos that come in and had worked there, and they'd all stop up for a few free meals and visit. It was kind of interesting. These hobos could tell some weird stories.
Give us one.
Pardon?
Can you remember one?
Oh.
Give us one you've told your grandkids.
One of the comes to mind, he was just a fellow that was working there. A neighbor had hired him, and he offered the team and the hired man on the plow to Dad. And it was one of those years when they got through early. And this was the year they had the prison riot down at the penitentiary in Walla Walla. It was on Lincoln's birthday in, I believe, 1934. And this old fellow, he says, "Get a copy of that paper. Bring a paper home tonight, kid." So I bought a paper before I walked home from school. And here was pictures of all these dead bodies of prisoners laying around in the yard. I knew this fellow, and I knew that fellow. And I said, "How did you know so many of these fellows?" "Oh," he says, "they used to bring them in, they'd mow the lawn there at the courthouse, and I'd got acquainted with him." And he passed over. It wasn't until later that we found out that he just got out of the pen and he'd been in for robbing boxcars. He happened to know them all. Well,
Something I've always wondered is, I know it's probably just been your life and stuff like that, but has it been good to be in Dayton all your life?
well, Columbia County,
Yeah.
yeah, it's, I traveled quite extensively during the war, and I've been happy here. I was a young man, and going out, you're always naturally looking for someplace better than what you got, but I couldn't find it. I'm very happy to be here in this county.
Tell us, you mentioned a little bit about the war. Did you tell us a little bit about your service tour and stuff? Were you in the service?
Let's wait a little while on that.
Okay, all right, we'll wait on.
We got, let me tell you about the old mail carrier. Saul McCauley, that was Darrell McCauley's father. He used to drive the buggy in the summertime, and if it got snow, he'd had to put his little house on a sled and drove his horses, and had a little coal stove in it. You could always see the smoke coming up out of the chimney. And we'd look, that was the highlight of the day out there. We were watching for the mailman. And as a kid, I remember sending for anything I could get that was free. And I had great expectations. I'd send anything that was free, and I'd always had mail to look forward to. But that was a rough old go on delivering that mail, particularly if the snow crusted, and then this crust would cut these horses' legs, and he had quite a time sometimes getting the mail through, but he always did. What else we got here? The teachers out at Columbia, there were about 36 to 38 students, had 2 rooms and 2 teachers. And teachers would usually hire one of the older boys to do the janitor work and split the kindling and maybe get there early enough and start the fires. And I don't know what they got paid, but I'm sure it wasn't any great amount.
Well, were you going to school in Starbuck at the time?
No, I was at Columbia School, in the grade school. When I went to Starbuck, we had 8 kids in my class graduated in 1934. But then the school got down to where there were only 9 kids in the whole thing, and we got it moved and consolidated with Dayton, as far as high school is concerned.
Well, what was maybe the question about Starbuck when you moved down there out to the ranch? What was the size of the Starbuck and how active we could do to be all that?
Oh, it wasn't a great deal. Oh, I don't know. I don't think there was over 300 people there. It had already started to move out. They were railroaders, though, the people that were there. And the town had already started going downhill several years before. But the old, they had the roundhouse and the boiler factory was working, and there was a division point. They'd make up trains there, and the switch engine was tooting all night long. Bert Delaney, that was a brother of Henry Delaney, that left the money for the Delaney building. He said that, he told me when he first went that there were 24 trains a day leaving Starbuck. And I've had several people have told me that they could remember when there was 12 trains a day leaving.
Well, that was a pretty good sized town, well, probably before your time.
Oh yeah, it was
Bigger than Dayton, maybe?
No, I don't think it was ever that big, but it had more payroll. When Dayton would have a depression and things were really tough, Starbuck had the payroll. They didn't know there was a depression. Old Chris List used to run the restaurant there and the pool hall when I was over there. That main part of town, there were two grocery stores. there was, there was quite a bit of activity going on around there. Starbuck was quite famous for its elk dances. They would come usually the Thursday before Thanksgiving, and said it didn't matter whether he was an elk or not, they were all odd fellows by morning.
They ever have any moonshine over there, Hallie?
Oh, yes, there was 3 or 4 booths active at the time I went over there. I don't know where they got it, but I know where a lot of them went.
Well, when you mentioned something about the Depression, do you remember that?
Do I remember it? Lord, yes, I remember it. Batching and no money, and I used to darn my own socks, put a light bulb inside and darn my socks up trying to patch the holes.
Now, this is when you were batching at the time?
Yeah.
You weren't married at the time?
Oh, no, this was back in the 30s.
Oh, yeah. Pretty hard to get enough money to get to town. Did you have a car, or how did you get to town?
Oh, Dad had a 29 Ford Coupe, but kept him over. Well, I guess he run it until 1935, and then he got a truck, Chevrolet truck, and then it had stock racks, but it didn't have hydraulic brakes, it had the mechanical brakes, and then in 36 it came out with the mechanical, or with the hydraulics, and it made quite a difference, so he got one of those. Then he done a lot of buying and selling and butchering. I might go back here to when they had this old stationery outfit, and Dad was a young fellow. He got started in cattle business by butchering beef at night, and they would peddle it to these harvest outfits in the daytime. And the meat, they didn't have refrigeration, and they couldn't store the meat, so it had to be used pretty fast. And the old cookhouses and the cooks and things up there, they might have had problems. That they'd have an old kitchen range on the cook wagon. They had a big crew to cook for. The harvesters would have kind of a rough, they played rough in those days. They called them blackjack. They'd take a 8-horse whip or something, 2 of them would stand there and see which one could make the other one run first, or if they caught somebody that acted up a little smart or done something during the daytime, they'd lay for him at night and then throw his covers back and grab him by the feet and drag him right down through a tarweed patch or something. Stubble dragging, they called that. They seemed like they were always wrestling. They liked to wrestle a lot. This wheat that they used to raise here was mostly all red wheat. There was some white wheat, but the red wheat that I remember was the triplet and the turkey red and so forth. And that triplet had a fuzz on it, and it was just, man, these people would all raw around their necks and scratch, and they'd only get to go to town on Saturday night and get a bath, and it was really rugged handling that, or even just handling the wheat sacks. You'd get this fuzz on you and on your arms. It was really bad. There was some white wheat raised that I think what I remember was the Jenkins Club and one they called 128. Then they come up with the combine when they finally done away with the stationary outfit and bought a combine. That had 5-man crew. You had the driver of the team, this was pulled by horses, and you had a header tender, a sack sewer, a sack jig, a machine man. And this machine man, he done the leveling and the braking and everything, and the greasing and maintenance of the machine. He was exempt from taking care of the horses. The others had to take care of a span of horses, each one. And after the work, and they'd have to get up in the morning and feed them and harness them. Then they
Did you do any of that yourself? What did you mostly do when you were working?
when I'd tend header on the combine, or well, I don't know, I herded sheep the first year I got out of high school, and cowboy lot. Dad always had cattle, and there's always fence to fix and cattle to be looked after. And it was customary to drive the cattle from the Starbuck country over to the Payne Hollow, right over there, and in the summertime, then you drove them back in the fall. The workhorses in the fall, after they through working, you're taking them over for the, used to be a lot of Starbuck rangeland around there, and that's where they winter the horses. And the horses, it didn't take long to drive them too, because they go on a pretty fast trot all the way through. You had to keep running them about, getting them out of fields and where somebody left gates open and things, but it didn't take, the little horses seemed like they knew where they was going and wanted to get back there as quick as they could. All the back roads, and we tried, as the gravel roads, by then we tried to keep them off the rocks so they wouldn't get, the rocks would hurt their feet and make their feet tender. And so we tried to use all the old back roads and dirt roads, but then they got to where you can't find any of them anymore. So.
Well, I know, Hallie, you said something about your father butchering at night. Now, that wasn't rustling. Was there any rustling in the country in those days?
No, he said as soon as he found out that was against the law, he quit.
But there wasn't much of that. Everybody was pretty honest.
Oh, yeah. No, it was just a means of the young fellow starting a business up and supplying a need, which was fresh meat to these harvest crews. And they worked long hours, and they had good appetites.
Well, how did you get your wheat? Hallie, you were talking about this harvest out there. How did you get your wheat? Was it in a bulk form, or how did you get it out?
Well, at first it was sacked. It was, you had to sack the column with the old stationaries. They had 2 sack sewers and a sack jig, because they had big capacity. The wheat would really be pouring out. They sew their sacks, and each little sack sewer, you'd start to pile it back this way as far as you pack it, and this one go this way, and then as they finished, they'd just about get together the time the set was finished, and then they'd haul the wheat with the team and wagon to the warehouses. But then when they got the combine, the combine would hold 5 sacks of wheat on the sack chute, and he'd try to pick a spot that was on a ridge or someplace that was easier to get at, or knock down a pile of tar weight, and then you'd dump your sacks and just kind of make a collection of sacked wheat in a certain area. And then that all had to be picked up off the ground and loaded on the wagon, and they'd bank it out sometime to where later on where the trucks could get at it. And then eventually they went to bulk, and then that eliminated an awful lot of work. My granddad, Fletcher, built a little warehouse down here at Long Station. He built his own warehouse, and when he had having sacked wheat, and the moisture in the air from that after it was put in, it was harvested in July or August, and dry. That wheat would pull moisture out of the air, and you ship it out along in the winter time or February or whatever. And that wheat, they'd always weigh it in and they'd weigh it out. And the overrun on his wheat that first year paid for his warehouse, he said.
There wasn't any water hose in there? And,
No, nothing like that, just moisture out of the air.
well, Hallie, did it go toward the coast by rail or?
Yeah, they'd ship it on, put it on the boxcar down here.
Do you ever remember any river traffic?
No, not until the dams went in. Although, I heard my grandmother tell about the early days and Betty John's hauling wheat from back on the mountain and hauling it over to Grange City. And there was quite a little place there, a livery stable, because they'd stay all night and rest their team and come back the next day. And that was a long haul to get your wheat, and then it would get on a riverboat there. And then it was taken upstream, up to Lewiston, and then put on a railroad up there. I didn't know that. That was a little different from what I thought. I thought once you put it on a boat, it would go downstream. But that was long before my time.
Yeah, well, Dottie asked the question about how they lighted Starbuck. There was something about a flume or a waterway.
Well, the old Starbuck electric ditch, which I own now, the dam is on my place, and the ditch diversion, originally it was a grist mill or feed mill, and then I think in 1907, Dr. Petrisky bought it, and then he put in generators, and they lit the town up then, and then the roundhouse and everything. It wasn't a very big concern, but it did supply electricity over there. We lived right on the end of the line, and once in a while the lights would go dim, and Dad said, oh, fish got caught in the turbine. But the REA come in and early 30s, but they wouldn't come to our place because we were served by this public utility. But in 1944, they sold out, and then the REA went into Starbuck. Well, let's see, where are we at now?
May I ask a question? How do you mean from that little dam on your place now, they ran the little turbine or whatever off of that during that dam?
Yeah, down to a light plant down there. There's pictures of it, and a whole story in this book here that Wilma wrote. Starbuck 82 to, from 1882 to 1982. It's all described in there.
Okay, how about the railroad? Why did the railroad go out there? What happened?
Well, the old railroad, the main line went through Starbuck and up over the Alto Hill, and then and that was the main line on into Walla Walla and Prescott, and you could that was Portland or Seattle or anywhere. That was
From where? Where did it come from?
Spokane, Tico, I don't know, it seemed, but that was a division point. They made up trains there, and the fellow there writing down the numbers of all these box cars and which train they were on, and they sometimes you had to be pretty fast with that because the train was picking up speed and you had to get those numbers. The reason it went out was when they put the railroad down along the Snake River, well, then that made a water grade out of it rather than going up over this relief grade. That's the reason they called it a relief. That's where they kept a relief engine to help the train get up over to the top of the Alto Hill. And well, I can remember when that was quite the highlight of the day when the train come in Starbuck. I think these two trains, but when everybody would go down and see who got off the train. That was a kind of nosy old people, I guess.
Well, one thing we didn't talk to you about when you mentioned your wife's book, When did you get married?
When?
When and who?
Well, I got,
How did you meet, first of all?
pardon?
How'd you guys meet? Tell us about your courtship and stuff, too.
Oh, she come to Ryan Sir to cook, and she's a pretty good cook. Anyway, I married Wilma Porter, Rubenser, and but I was in the service when I got married. I come down on a Sunday. I couldn't even get a week. I got off at Saturday noon. Got down to Starbucks on Saturday night, and I told Dad I was going to get married the next day. He said, "You can't get married on a Sunday." I said, "You just watch." It was in hunting season, 11th of October, 42. So we got over, well, the auditor, he was out hunting, so we had to wait till he got back. And we had to get the justice of the peace. We had to get a waiver of the 3-day limit. And we were married in the old commissioner's room at the courthouse, and we caught a bus, I don't know, 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock, what time that bus left, but we got in Spokane there. It was midnight before we finally found a room. The town was completely full of soldiers, and we finally did locate a room. Old Ray Shale rode up with us, and he's in the same plight we was, so he paid for our room that night, said that was his wedding present. And we got to bed at midnight, and I had to leave a call at 4 o'clock because I had to stand reveille at 6 o'clock.
So you were in the service by that time and you came home and got married, is that?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just ready to go overseas.
When did you go into service?
27th of June, 42.
Where did you take your basic training and so on?
Camp Roberts, California.
Then, when you shipped out, what happened? Where'd you go?
I can tell you a funny story about that, if you promise not to tell anybody.
No, we won't tell.
Well, I was a sergeant of the guard up there the night the trains go out, and they had these 2 freight cars backed up there, and they were kitchen cars, and the cooks had their stoves and everything in them, and it was cold. It was below 0, and daylight had came, and I dismissed the guard, and I said, well, I'll take a walk around these 2 cars and see if, make sure everything's all right before I go back. The snow was at least 18 inches deep, and I going back, and here there was they had hot coffee in this headquarters company car, and I didn't even know there was anybody there. And they said, you better have a cup of hot coffee. Well, I said, that sure sounds good. And I stepped in the car there, and the coffee was pretty hot, and I was kind of nursing it along, and then all of a sudden an engine backed into the train, started moving, and I said, well, I better get off here. He said, oh, no. He said, you might fall under the wheel. He said, he'll stop right down here in a little bit. Well, he didn't stop till he got clear down to Galena, about 5 miles. And I jumped off the car, and here come a whole bunch of officers in there, and says, where are you going? I said, well, I got to get back up there to Geiger Field. No, you can't. Well, I said, I got to notify the captain where I'm at. You can't do that. Well, I said, what am I going to do? He said, just stay with us. He said, we're all going to the same place anyhow. So we ended up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. 2 trains pulled in side by side, and my corporal, he was on where he belonged, and he hollered at Sergeant Fletcher aboard that train. And I stuck my head out and said, yeah, here I am. Well, I rode 3,000 miles on the wrong train, but we got there anyway. Well, anyway, after a little while, we left Fort Dix and sailed for, we didn't know where we were going, but we ended up in Casablanca, in Africa, in Morocco. Sailed out, let's see, it was the 8th day of February, 1943. That's 48 years ago today that I set foot on, or left the United States. And you didn't know where you were going, or whether you were coming back, or you didn't know whether you was going to get there, or it was kind of a...
You know, a lot of people probably don't know where Casablanca is. There was a movie that you probably ran into that fellow.
That was, everybody was looking for Rick's American Bar when they got over there. They didn't find it. The Arabs, well, that town is different than any other town I was ever in, because it's just about like Hollywood. I mean, the way they dress and everything. Then we went to Oran. They rode on these old 40 and 8 cars, 40 men or 8 horses. But with all our paraphernalia and everything, and that first night you laid down just your feet together, and just like this, and if you lift one hip up or something, somebody else was under you. It was just packed in there like sardines. And the next night, some of us took our mattress covers and put rocks in the corners and then tied them to the side of the car and made a hammock, and that took 6 or 8 of us off the floor. I left a little more room. But we rode that first one was 5 days and nights, I think, before we got off of it. And then later, that was Lasenia, that was out of Oran. I might tell you at Casablanca, I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but the French Navy had pulled into Casablanca and Oran, and they were playing politics. You know, France was divided. They had Vichy French, which was supposed to be the independent France, and the Germans controlled the rest of it. But these big warships, the British wanted them to surrender, and the French refused to do it. So the British battleships laid off there and fired into them and sunk all these French ships right at the docks. These big old battleships land on their sides when you come in there, and a lot of sailors with no ship. They felt they hated the British for that. They didn't like that very good. But anyway, we went to from Lasenia, Oran. I went to a place they call Medjez El Bab. We got off the train there. That was quite prominent during the war because there had been some terrific tank battles in there.
Now this is, you're talking about North Africa?
Yeah, this would be in Algeria. And later on we went to the other side of Tunis. I know there was some pretty bad things in there. But my job, we were building airfields, was our purpose. And conditions in Africa, they didn't, you had DDT to dust your blankets with about every 10 days. These chiggers or things start biting and you dust that in your blankets and then clear it up. But that was all the DDT they had and what little can you give you. And the flies, the dysentery were just out of this world. And but then the next summer we were in Italy and they had DDT and it was altogether different. There was no flies at all. And but then we went to Tunis, in Tunisia, and It was out about 30 miles out of there. The old Roman ruins were there, the old Roman aqueducts and so forth. And it took a kind of like a streetcar from the city of Tunis. You could go out to the old ancient city of Carthage. And it was about just a few days prior to that, Winston Churchill had gave a victory speech to the British 8th Army at Carthage. They were in the old amphitheater. Well, when we were there, we just I and 2 or 3 buddies that was with me. So I went to the podium and I could imagine this British 8th Army sitting over out there. I was standing where Winston did. There'd been a heck of a windstorm and then a rainstorm before we got there. And one of the boys, there was a few big, one of the boys at the base of one of these columns, he found quite a handful of silver coins. They were all black, but they would probably been in a leather pouch or something one time or other. Lord knows how long they'd been there. Well, anyway, we sailed out of Bizerti in October and went to Italy, landed at Toronto and heel of the boot, and then up the Adriatic coast. And when we got to Foggia, which was later to become quite a plane satellite bomber base around Foggia, Maine. I was probably one of the first 10 Yanks on Foggia, Maine. But the British 8th Army Germans back, and the Germans were 8 miles up the road when we got there. And they'd come in and these fighter planes, and the Americans, if you flew a plane, you were a commissioned officer. Over there, they were just sergeants. And they'd take off, and pretty soon here they'd come back, and they'd just get out of those planes and just dance, just like you pull a horse out of a race. They'd just dance, hurry, 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 and they'd want more gas, more ammunition, more bombs, and away they'd go all day long like that. They had the Spitfires and the P-40s. They said they liked the Spitfire the best. Of course, they were pro-British, but it was a good plane.
Where were you when the end of the war came?
Oh, I got back in Italy. I went from Italy then, when we left Foggia, and we went over the Apennines, rode in the back of a truck in a snowstorm going over these mountains. And then we sailed up Naples. That was kind of funny. While we were there, they'd been to old Pompeii, and some of them went around Vesuvius the day before, and then that day we sit out there in a boat there. We got loaded us out there in the Bay of Naples for a little while, and just within an hour or two after we left, Vesuvius blowed up. It's the first time in 40 years that it blowed, and it hadn't blowed since. But I just missed it. But then landed at Ajaccio, Corsica. That's a beautiful little harbor. It's what they call a landlocked harbor. You come sailing in and like kind of up a canyon, and here's like a lake, and when you get in there, you can't tell where you come in. But that's where Napoleon Bonaparte was born, and they had that. And we built this airfield about 30 miles south of Bastia. And in the morning, early when the sun come up, you could see the island of Elba in the distance. That's where Napoleon was, where they exiled him there for a while. Then when we sailed from there, we went into southern France and landed at San Rafael. It was near San Rafael, what they call Green Beach, which is on the French Riviera. And then we went through, I got there as far as Dijon. It was about 120 miles from Paris. But we were overextended, and they'd sent A company up there, but this was an area so far north that was supposed to be occupied by the boys coming in from Belgium. So then they pulled A Company back, and then they didn't have any liaison there, anybody to keep between the Air Force and civilians. And so I got sent up there for about 3 weeks until these fellows come in from Belgium. And that was quite an experience. Anyhow, we went back France. We sailed out of there on Thanksgiving Day out of Marseille, and went through these straits. It was the first ones through after a minesweeper went through, and we landed at Livorno, or Leghorn, as we call it. And that was, the town was off limits, and all barbed wire, and they had typhus. But it was, we kind of camped up there on top of the hill, and they said it was about 12 miles.
How about to take on the minutes for you?
12 miles to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Is that thing still running?
Yeah.
You bet.
Well, then Hallie, when you wound up, you came back into New York when you came back?
No, that's another story. We went to France, or went from France back to Italy, and then we had to go across Italy and go back to the Adriatic side again. We was always with the British 8th Army, and then we built airfields in there, and then we got orders to go to the up into the Po Valley, and I was up there when the war ended. But that one field there, it was unlike the United Nations. They had they took 800 fighter planes off of that field one morning at one strip. That's one every 20 seconds, 3 a minute. And we started to go across that runway, and you never knew, maybe 20, 30 planes would go take off and quit, you know. They never quit all morning long. And we went to eat dinner, and when we came back, then they were coming back in. It was made up of Polish troops and the French Lafayette Squadron and Australians and Yanks. It was kind of like just the United Nations walking around that thing. I asked the Yanks what kind of fighters those Aussies was. Oh, he says they won't come down. They want to do all their fighting high up. They won't come down. I didn't know. I went on around. Here's the Aussie camp, and here's a plane just come in. He's got a tree limb about 2.5 inches diameter, and he's about that far on the end of his wing, cut about 2/3 of the way back, and it's sticking up about 6 or 7 feet with all these green leaves on it. And I said, what happened here? And he said, the bloody bloke, he got after a truck, the truck ran under a tree to hide, and he went right down through the top of the tree after it. Well, the Yanks just told me they wouldn't come down and fight. I don't know how low they had to get.
Is there any other questions? Anybody else have something? Do we have somebody else we need to interview? Okay.
Okay, Hallie, what year did your dad go out to Starbuck? And then is there some story to how he acquired that place? Was it...
Oh, no, let's see. I don't know. He rented, he had that Moran place rented down there where Dick Jackson lives before he, and then he bought the Lee place that joins your place way back where that old well was, and then he acquired the place where we live.
So how long did it take to ride horseback from Dayton to Starbuck?
Depended on the horse,
Right.
which way he was going.
If he was headed for the barn, how long did it take him?
No, it didn't take too long. If you done quite a bit of galloping. Why, you'd be over there, I suppose 3 hours or so. Well, maybe I don't know. I didn't have any watch at the time, so.
Hallie, I'd like to ask about any Indians that you might have seen roaming around the Starbuck area.
Well, I personally didn't have very much to do with the Indians. Pete, or Fusilicum, I guess they call him, one time we'd give him a ride, brought him over to Dayton, and see him down there, but I didn't, I never went down around their place very much. I've heard Harry Mann told us that when he'd remember when the Indians had their sweat baths over there, and he could watch them. Things he could build, go in, he sweat out and then run out and jump in the river.
Where was this?
Lions Ferry.
Tell us about Lions Ferry.
Well,
Tell about the ferry too, as well as the Indians that were,
well, I'd have to use my book to see if to find it.
well, just give a general description
Well,
about
the
where.
old ferry was, well, I don't know, it had different names, but it was there, one of the first ferries. There's several stories there about the Indians when they were after the ones that killed Marcus Whitman. There was a camp there at the mouth of the Toucan, and the Indians, they were all innocent. They got the soldiers to help them round up the horses out on the hill, and when they looked down, the squaws had taken down the teepees and all their kids, and they were all going across the river in the boats. As soon as they were safe, why these Indians turned on the soldiers, and then they had this running battle up the Kellogg there. That was before my time.
Who put the cable in? Tell about how that ferry worked on the cable, and who put that cable in?
Oh, I don't know. Well, you had to have a cable to have a ferry. Anybody, whoever built the first ferry, I could check through the book there and tell you more about it. But that was a cable. The ferry would run suspended from this cable on these pulleys, and they would float the boat, point to one end upstream, let one down, and that would, current would hit it and it would carry it across this way, or they'd reverse it and the current would carry it back. It's just the flow of the current hitting the ferry at an angle.
Yeah, that was in service up till what, about
Till the dam was
15,
built.
20 years ago?
Yeah.
Well, we thank you very much, Hallie, for visiting with us this afternoon, and this will be a very good addition to the Dayton video program. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.